outline what cart abandonment is?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, cart abandonment would be when a visitor to a website lands on the site, they add items into their basket, and they unfortunately leave without completing that purchase.
Mm-hmm. And would you say there's any concerns about why would brands be concerned about that sort of
Yeah, I
thing?
think nowadays we operate in such a competitive landscape, not just in the email inbox, but with the cost of living crisis, etc. Brands should be really focusing on their cart abandonment strategy, as ultimately, if you don't get back to them in relatively quick time with a compelling message at the right time, there's a likelihood they may potentially purchase from a competitor, which we don't want to have.
Yeah, keep them on that site and make sure they actually do convert.
Absolutely, yeah 100%.
What would you say a good, average and poor cart abandonment rate would look like?
Yeah, good question. I think websites on the whole are all developed in a very different way. Some have really simple, short conversion and checkout journeys. Some are very prolonged. So each sector, each vertical can also have very different abandonment rates. So I think if we look at the likes of the retail sector, abandonment rates on average are around about 74% at the moment, whereas so quite reasonable. And then when we look at fashion, that sits around about 85% abandonment rate. And then we move into travel, it sits at around about 84%. But I suppose if you look at all of those particular sectors, some of them within that particular sector can be very different as well. So if you look at the travel sector, the types of communications that you would want to have with an airline could be very different to a car rental, to a hotel chain. So the approach you take to abandonments can be very different in terms of the messaging.
Yeah, makes sense. And how would a brand work out what their cart abandonment looks like?
Yeah, so the way you would work out a customer's abandonment rate, if we take the pie analogy, so what you want to ultimately do, first of all, is you want to understand how many baskets have been generated overall on a website. Now, that would encompass anybody who'd made a purchase, but also anybody who's formed a basket, those abandoners. And then what you would do is you would record and make a note of that number, and then you would subtract the conversions, people who've made a purchase, and then you would divide it by that overall number, times it by 100 would give you your abandonment rate. Abandonment rates on average, if we look at all sectors, sit around about 80%. So don't be alarmed if the number is high.
Seems quite high.
Yeah, it really does. I suppose not everybody who comes to your website are going to purchase then and there. There's a lot of factors and reasons why somebody might potentially abandon. It might be that they're coming to the end of their normal browsing behaviour, work lunchtime. It might be that they are considering price. They might be having a problem with a payment method online. So the approach should be very much tailored, and it's good to get customers' feedback on maybe why they aren't purchasing. Exactly.
Yeah. Why is a cart abandonment strategy important for any online brand?
Yeah, great question. I think why an online strategy is really important is we need to make sure that we're retargeting customers as quickly as we possibly can do after they've made that abandonment. As research shows that the quicker you speak and interact with that customer after the abandonment, the lot more likely they are to purchase. They're still in that buy-in phase, they're still engaged. So we very much suggest that you roll out a 2-cycle cart abandonment strategy. First one typically sent anywhere after 30 minutes to 1 hour after the abandonment, with a compelling reason as to why they should come back to the website, why they should purchase, with simple, easy routes back to their basket and to pick up where they left off, followed by a secondary gentle reminder somewhere between 22 hours to 48 hours for those people who maybe need a little bit longer for a considered purchase, for example.
Like a high ticket item.
Exactly.
And what would you say is the best way for brands to invest in a cart abandonment strategy?
Yeah, so I think optimization of your campaign, or creating a cart abandonment campaign if you don't have one already. It's really important to benchmark as well, I feel. Understand what you're doing really well within your cart abandonment campaign and which areas you could potentially improve on. It's really important to start with an open rate optimization plan, so really making sure as many people are open in your communication as possible. So that would be looking at the likes of your subject lines, your pre-headers, make sure that you're standing out in the email inbox, as well as your send times. I mentioned the second cycle between 22 hours afterwards, and you might think
Yeah.
that's a little bit of an odd time. But a really nice tip would be on that is that if you think about a normal browsing behaviour, you may be finishing your lunch, you may be browsing your phone before going to sleep on an evening.
Always.
If we were to send a communication after 24 hours, it would be coming at the end of your normal browsing behaviour. So if we send it at 22 hours ahead of that normal browsing behaviour, it's at the top of your inbox. You're a lot more likely to interact with it and purchase. So there's that for open rate improvements, and then you could create a click rate optimization plan as well. Make sure that your message is compelling. The text to image ratio is right. It's not too text heavy. Do some click rate analysis to make sure there's no elements of your template that perhaps potentially aren't being clicked. Is that a distraction? Is it something you could potentially remove from the design to get clicks and conversions? So it's definitely important to optimize, segment your data, make sure that you're speaking to the right audience with the right message at the right time.
Yeah, there's a lot of insight and sort of testing and learning as you go as well.
100%.
Yeah.
And testing's an ongoing thing as well. I don't think it should ever really end, because what your customers interact with and works well now, potentially in 12 to 18 months, may not be the right fit. And advocates of your brand who potentially regular visits and regular abandonments, they want to see something new, fresh on a regular basis. So feel free to change up your subject lines, your pre-headers, and make sure the content of your email remains fresh and matches the look and feel of your website as much as possible as well.
So for brands that see a really high cart abandonment rate, what are the usual mistakes that have contributed to that?
Yeah, I think one big thing is people potentially have a low attention span. Probably shouldn't say that, but you want to ultimately make sure that that customer journey is as short as possibly can be in order to make that customer convert. If you have a long drawn out checkout journey where there's certain elements that perhaps aren't clear, the cost of delivery, it's really important to have things like social proofing in your emails as well. So things like Trustpilot reviews, just bringing that personal touch. There's another person that endorses that brand, have maybe purchased that product, had a really good experience with that brand. It's just really important to be as clear, remove any obstacles and pain points for that customer ultimately making that purchase. And sometimes brands try to overload with too much information or too little information, and it can sometimes be a little bit too much for consumers and a little bit off-putting, and maybe will lead to abandonment.
So for brands that typically are seeing a high cart abandonment rate, what are the common mistakes that are probably contributing to that?
So a lot of brands that have a high abandonment rate would have a long, prolonged checkout journey, typically where there's multiple steps where you're given so much information and there's maybe missing information at certain points, where adding things like social proofing into the mix in terms of people who've previously bought from the brand or bought those specific items, them giving their endorsement gives that level of trust, which I think if you're purchasing from a brand for the first time, sometimes can feel a little bit missing through that particular journey. I think you need to be really clear and upfront with your returns process, your delivery costings, etc. Try to give as much information as you possibly can do to those customers to stop any reason for them going and looking potentially elsewhere. If the price is great, they won't be looking for things like discount codes, but you need to very much tailor your approach to the sector that you're targeting, because some set of products work really well for fast fashion, where you can't use those same tactics for luxury fashion or maybe in the travel industry. So try to keep it as short and concise in terms of a checkout journey. And in terms of cart abandonment and remarketing, make sure that the email capture point where a person can leave their personal information and an email address in order for them to be retargeted, try to bring that as far forward in the journey as you possibly can do, so that if they do leave, we've got it and we can retarget that particular customer.
Yeah, perfect. What fixes can brands do to reduce their cart abandonment rate?
Yeah, so a really good tip for reducing cart abandonment rate, I think ultimately you want to understand why customers are abandoning on your site. Now, there's a lot of common reasons why, but what you could do, and we mentioned before Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 emails, were very much around generating and getting those customers to come back and make that conversion. What you could equally do is implement the third cycle with survey options in there as well, to really get the customer to give feedback on why they aren't making the purchase. A really good insight in terms of, we were just browsing the market, checking out some prices. We might have discovered a problem partway through the checkout journey. If it's travel, it's more of a considered purchase. They may have ultimately found a cheaper price elsewhere. Getting that feedback, I think, is really valuable. Free type box where they can elaborate on their answer. Once you've got that feedback, you can really make changes to your approach, not just on the website, but in your cart abandonment emails as well, to really drive that particular cart abandonment. That's one great way. Another way would be to make sure that your cart abandonment emails have other compelling messages in them as well. So if you add into a second cycle, it's really important to differentiate your first cycle from your second cycle. Make sure the communications are different, they're fresh. Introducing the likes of recommended items into a second cycle, where that customer over time may have made a decision not to purchase that original item, but if you're able to suggest other items based on, statistics on other purchases and other browsing behavior from other customers, and incorporate that in the recommended items, they may actually decide, I'm not buying the original item, I actually like the look of one of the recommendations better, or even better, they might purchase both.
Yeah. Amazing. So if you manage to lower that cart abandonment rate, what sort of impact does that have for a brand?
Yeah, so a lower cart abandonment rate ultimately is a very positive thing. It means customers are visiting the website, they're converting then and there, and it reduces that risk of customers abandoning and losing some of that revenue. So it's a very good thing. If you've got a low abandonment rate, you're obviously doing something right on the site. Now, that might be ways of pushing customers further through that purchase funnel while they're still on the website, which is key, and that can be adding a sense of urgency. So using the likes of countdown timers when you're on the website, consumer trends, how many people have looked at an item or potentially viewed an item in the last 24 hours, or low in stock notifications as well. If somebody thinks that an item's low in stock, they're a lot more likely to purchase the item rather than missing out. So there's tactics you can use while you're online to help reduce that abandonment rate. But if for whatever reason they do drop out, it's really important to have a cart abandonment strategy that makes the most of that interaction with the customer after they have left.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes hand in hand with the marketing channels. There's so much budget that actually gets the traffic to the site. You 100%. Want to do everything in your power to keep them and not go to a competitor or just not make any purchase in the end.
Acquiring a customer is so much more expensive than actually retaining one for a longer period of time. So you want to make the most of that traffic when it is landing on your website, and curb abandonment as much as you possibly can.